All right, hi everyone. Thanks again for joining our webinar today. Today we have Research Rockstar, and they're going to be talking about how to create a stellar survey through brainstorming. And today we have on the line Catherine Korlstoff, and she is a lead instructor at Research Rockstar. She's a market research professional with over 25 years of experience, and Catherine has designed and executed more than 600 projects, both B2B and consumer, so you know that she really knows her stuff. Her current focus is on market research training and skill development, helping clients mitigate the risk through all phases of market research lifecycle through current methods, best practices, and foundational knowledge. My name is Dan Fleetwood. I'm president of Question Pro Communities here, and I'm going to be helping out moderating the session today. I'm excited to join you, and without further ado, I will pass it over to Catherine. But first, if you have questions, we're going to have time at the end for questions. So please feel free to use the questions on GoToWebinar, and I will be taking a look at those, and we will answer as many as we can as time will allow at the end of the webinar. So Catherine, go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan, and welcome everyone. I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about a really important topic today, which is where many of us people who do a lot of survey research really live. How do we make sure our questionnaires are great? So I believe that it looks like my volume is good, so I think you folks can hear me okay. So I'm going to jump right in. So what we're going to do in this very short session is we're going to talk about how to facilitate a great brainstorming session that will really help you to create great questionnaire content. We want to make sure we identify the most important content, we get some prioritization, and we want to make sure that we do this in a way that's going to keep the participants engaged. That is, whoever your colleagues are, whatever your team is that's involved in designing a questionnaire, we want them to be part of the process. One of the things that many of us who've been in research for a long time know is that it's really important to get your whole team, whether you are working with internal clients or external clients, involved early on in the project. It really does maximize the chance that they'll use your research results at the end of the day. So that's what I really want to make sure is that you've got a process that will allow you to not only design a great questionnaire, but one that people will really be looking forward for the results when the project ends. So let's just start with a little bit of basic introduction about some of the jargon we use when we talk about brainstorming. So first of all, what is brainstorming? We've all heard the phrase, but there can be a bunch of different definitions. These are basically different definitions I found online in preparing for today's chat. Is it a process to help you break out of standard thinking patterns, or an exercise used to jumpstart a creative process? Some people might say that it's a method of problem solving, or a process for using unrestrained or spontaneous participation to generate ideas. So, which of these definitions do you feel is the right one? In my experience, it's really all of these things, and specifically in the context of working on questionnaire design, it's a process that we will use to generate a list of variables for possible inclusion in a well-planned questionnaire. And the reason why we need it, well, haven't we all been in meetings where we felt that we didn't participate as much as we could have? We didn't contribute fully our knowledge or our ideas. Sometimes it's because of fear. Indeed, there's a lot of research on meeting efficacy, and one of the things that often comes up in this research about meeting efficacy is people being afraid to participate fully. Maybe you are working on developing ideas for a questionnaire, but you're afraid that your ideas might be perceived as wrong or really too far out there, and you're going to be perceived as different by your colleagues and coworkers. Some people might be afraid that their ideas might be contradictory and that there could be repercussions, or perhaps even just feeling like you don't have permission to truly generate all of the possible ideas that you have. So brainstorming is something that we need in a lot of different kinds of meetings. And for meetings where we're working on hypotheses for questionnaire design especially. Now, I think we've all been in these situations. You're in a meeting to discuss questionnaire design, and it might even be a cross-functional group, right? There could be people from different departments or functional areas. Maybe there's people from a market research supplier or market research internal department. subject matter experts, people from sales, people from marketing. It can be a really dynamic group when we're kicking off a questionnaire design. And yet, even with all these great people, sometimes if we go through the process of identifying potential hypotheses for exploration or variables we want to include in the questionnaire, we can be hampered by a lot of things like just habits, the way these meetings are typically run. The thing I typically run into, though, conventional wisdom, right? Everybody has ideas about how their organization does questionnaires, how their organization standardizes on specific demographic variables or specific variables related to how they measure attitudes and behaviors amongst their particular customer group. Now, there can be a lot of value in those things, but sometimes it's also good to challenge them, right? Because things change over time. So, for example, I remember once I was working with a client and they just felt that during their questionnaire design process, they had a very strong feeling that we didn't need to ask a lot about, in their case, different types, anything really related to price, because they felt that they knew that their target market was a market that valued product attributes and especially aesthetics. So it was a home stereo type of product or home theater type of product, and they felt very strongly that their target market cared more about aesthetics than anything to do with price. The thing is, those things can change over time. So even though there may be conventional wisdom that started off really being quite accurate, maybe it's not accurate anymore. So we can use this brainstorming opportunity as a way to refresh and really make sure that we're not over-relying on potentially outdated pieces of conventional wisdom. Also, I think we've all been in research kickoff meetings where there was a dominant participant, right? In market research, we think of managing our dominant respondents when we're doing focus groups, but we also have to sometimes manage our dominant meeting participants as well. Sometimes in these meetings, nobody's really facilitating the process, so not everybody's ideas are getting encouraged and captured. And sometimes you can even go too crazy, right? You can have too many ideas. Now, the reality is, I don't think there's anything wrong with having too many ideas. If I'm in a market research project kickoff meeting and we're talking about questionnaire design and people are contributing too many ideas, that is a good problem. And all I really need then is some sort of prioritization process. So even if I'm feeling as the person who's going to be writing this questionnaire that I've got too many ideas for questions and variables, there are a lot of different ways that I can prioritize those to make it manageable for the amount of real estate that I likely am going to have in my questionnaire. And we're going to talk about a couple of ways of prioritizing if we have too many ideas when we get to the specific brainstorming exercises that I'll be sharing with you today. Now, as market researchers, one of the things that we typically do is when we're starting a new project, including survey research projects, is we'll have a kickoff meeting. So I'm sure all of you have had some experience, or most of you had experiences where you've attended a kickoff meeting. And these kickoff meetings have pretty standard agendas. You know, very often we are going to review the project objectives. We are going to talk about the sampling plan. We are going to talk about the deliverables. When the project is done, what's the deliverable going to look like? We might have timelines, dependencies, escalation processes, right? That's always a good thing to talk about, especially if we're doing a really complex project. It's always good to talk about having an escalation process. Standard things that need to be discussed and agreed upon at a kickoff meeting for any real professional survey design type project. But there's still one more thing, right? Hypothesis generation. So even though you're at a place where you're starting a questionnaire project and you may have the objectives documented, you still need to make sure that you do identify all of your hypotheses. This is where you're going to make sure that we have the right hypotheses, we've thought about it thoroughly, because only then can I make sure that I am going to identify all of the variables that I really need in my questionnaire in order to test those hypotheses. So let's take a look at some very simple examples. Let's imagine we've got a number of project objectives. Here, let me see if I have a little pointer over here. Here we go. So let's imagine that I've got, oh, it's not a pointer, excuse me. So let's imagine we've got some project objectives over here on the left-hand side of my screen. Here, I'm going to end up drawing on my screen a little bit, but that's okay. There are a lot of different types of objectives. These are 3 hypothetical objectives that I might be working on at any given moment in time. Here's a project I've personally done a lot where an organization has experienced an increase in customer defections. So they're losing more sales than they used to, or people aren't renewing. You see this a lot, for example, with companies that provide cell phone service, magazine subscriptions, that sort of thing, where they're not getting the renewals that they expect. So why has that happened? So that's a great objective, but we really need to make sure that we brainstorm all of those possible reasons because we don't want to just test, say, the 3 or 5 most obvious reasons. We might end up drawing the wrong conclusions. So this is a great example of a project where it's really important to me to make sure that I have identified all of the possible reasons, that I've really done a great job on my idea generation, so that I can make sure that when we come out of the field and we've got all this great data, that I really can be sure that we've identified what reasons are, or what reasons are most likely contributing to an increase in customer defections. Here's another great project, very classic. So an organization is about to roll out a new product or service. Oops. An organization is about to roll out a new product or service, excuse me, and they're trying to understand what kinds of marketing messages they need to have that are really going to resonate with those folks during when they're rolling out the new product or solution. And so that, again, is a case where there may be some obvious ideas about what marketing messages are going to work, but there also could be a lot less obvious ones that might even be contrary, but that could be important to test. So we want to make sure that we brainstorm a bunch of ideas about what those marketing messages are. We don't want to go too narrow. Or how about this last one? I've actually done this project for 2 different clients, although both of them, to be honest, were quite some time ago. But still, it's a really interesting thing. A lot of organizations these days still have print catalogs, even though they do a lot of their marketing online. You see that a lot in retail. So, important research question. If we discontinue our print catalog, how might sales change? Well, there's some obvious answers, right? Oh, sales might go down. Sales might go up. Sales might go down with specific demographic groups. Sales might have no change with other demographic groups. But I bet with a little brainstorming, we could easily come up with 10 or 20 additional ideas that may warrant inclusion in a questionnaire so that we understand everything. Because maybe some of this stuff is less obvious. Maybe it's not just about whether or not sales go down. Maybe it has to do with word of mouth. So yes, if I discontinue that catalog, maybe it's not going to have any impact on sales. However, maybe it's having an impact on word of mouth. So I want to make sure that I capture all of these potentially wonderful ideas. Now, I'm curious for you folks, if anybody here has ever had that experience where you've completed data collection. You've come out of the field, you've just done a survey of 5,000 consumers about, oh, I don't know, their favorite pizza toppings, whatever it is, and you realize, oh my gosh, forehead slap, I forgot to ask if they want organic pepperoni. Oh no, now you can't do all of the analysis because you don't have all the right variables. Your data analysis and your conclusions are going to be hampered. So unfortunately, even with the best of intentions, this can happen. But brainstorming, making sure you're harnessing all of the knowledge that your team has to generate as many ideas as possible, even though some of those ideas are not going to make it into the questionnaire, but still to get as many as possible to prioritize, that's really going to minimize that awful situation. We want to mitigate that risk of coming out of data collection and feeling like, oh, if I'd only asked that 1 or 2 other questions, I would have such more robust analysis. So that's what we're trying to avoid. All right, so we've talked a little bit about brainstorming and why it is so important. So it's important to make sure we have the right, great content for our questionnaire, and it's also important because it helps us to get buy-in from our team members. And ultimately, it's going to make our life easier so that we don't find ourselves in that very stressful situation of being at the end of a project and wishing, oh, if I'd only asked those other questions, I'd be so much better off. So let's talk about the steps to getting ready for using brainstorming in your kickoff meeting, okay? So first of all, you're going to want to focus a bit because there are a lot of potential variables that you could be doing your brainstorming about. So you want to have some focus. So for example, you may have maybe you're interested in brainstorming sample qualifications and demographic variables of interest. So for qualifications, for example, maybe you're doing your first survey on, oh, I don't know, let's say you're doing your first survey for a client who is in the protein bar market, right? I don't know if you folks have noticed, but there's this proliferation of food bar and protein bar products in grocery stores these days. And there may be some qualifications that seem pretty obvious. But it's your first time. So you're assuming, hey, there's probably some, qualifications. If we want to do research with people who buy and consume protein bars, then there's some obvious qualifications. Have you bought a protein bar or eaten a protein bar within the last 14 days, for example? So there's going to be some obvious ones, but maybe there's some other not so obvious ones. Maybe depending on what the client's strategy is, maybe it's important for you to understand or to screen people based on things related to physical activity, overall eating behaviors, their employment status. Maybe they're going after a very particular target market that eats protein bars that has to do with people who are looking for meal replacement. So there could be a lot of interesting things that could come up beyond the obvious. So that could be an area for brainstorming. However, in most cases, the brainstorming has to do with what are the specific things that we want to measure in terms of attitudes and behaviors, right? So if I am doing a study for a protein bar company, a lot of good, and let's imagine that for this, I'm trying to understand where people are, where they're eating their protein bars. Is it a meal replacement at the desk? Is it on the go? Is it in the car? On public transportation? Whatever it is in this hypothetical example. So there could be some really great brainstorming about what all the places are where people might be and what activities they might be engaged in when they're eating protein bars. So that could be a really rich area for investigation. Or maybe we want to investigate perceptions of protein bars. Right? There could be a ton of different perceptions that could be valuable to our client. Maybe it has to do with their personal values. Maybe we want to do some brainstorming about what are the personal values people might have that are correlated to whether or not they are likely to consume this type of protein bar. So lots of rich opportunity for brainstorming. And then, of course, there could be some brainstorming that needs to happen to make sure that you have the right variables for all of your data analysis. So sometimes you might just be planning to do simple crosstabs or banner tables. Still, you want to make sure you have all of those variables identified. And sometimes what I find is that clients need a little help. So a lot of times they'll have certain defaults, like they know they're going to want to see all of the data about protein bar eating habits, for example, by gender and maybe household income. But could there be other things that they're going to want to analyze? With a little brainstorming, you might find out that actually it would also be very helpful for them to understand how that varies by what brand of protein bar they most recently ate. Or maybe something that's more psychographic related about aspirations. So there can be other things that we want to brainstorm about. So even with these brief examples, I think I've shown you that we could be brainstorming about a lot of things. So we're going to have to pick, one or two things because you don't want to have a 12-hour kickoff meeting, right? So we have to bound this somewhat. But think carefully. Depending on what your project is, it may make more sense to focus on one of these areas than another. Okay, so figure out what the brainstorming needs to be about. Step 2, plan your attendees and your venue. All right, this might sound really trite, but it's really important. Certain brainstorming activities work really well with different size groups. There are some brainstorming activities that work really great if you have 5 to 10 people, but they don't work well if you have 20 people. Today I'm giving you 2 brainstorming exercises, both of which I've used many times specifically for questionnaire planning. And one of the things I really like about both of these exercises is that they are easy to run either with individual participation or with teams. So what you'll see when I present these exercises to you is that there are certain parts of the exercises that you can either have people as individuals in the meeting conduct or break them into groups or teams and have teams work together. In general, I find that if you have more than 20 people, brainstorming can be tough, and I find that at that point you might want to consider either prioritizing who's going to be in that meeting or perhaps breaking it into separate sessions. It's very important to think about who's going to be participating in the brainstorming. Diversity is key. You're not going to get great brainstorming if everybody works in the marketing department. You're not going to get great brainstorming if everybody works in product development. And frankly, you're not going to get brainstorming if the only people in the meeting are market researchers. You need to have a mix. You are looking for a mix of job titles, a mix of seniority levels, most important, a mix of client interactions. It's usually best to make sure that some of the people in that meeting have direct client contact. So if you are in a B2B organization or working with a B2B client, you might want to have people from the sales organization or who support channel partners. And if you're in the consumer space, it could be great to have some people who have some direct either retail experience or other direct client-facing experience, maybe in customer support. Personality types also. You don't want everybody to have the same sort of energy and approach to things, right? So it's nice to try to seek a mix of personality types so that you get really great diversity. In terms of the venue, it's really important to have enough room in whatever space you're going to be using. So if you're using a space that's dominated by a giant conference table, that can actually impede brainstorming. You want to make sure you have a room where people can actually stand up, walk around, and move. And temperature control it does sound so silly, but it's so true. You really want to have decent temperature control because when you have a long meeting, the room tends to get warm, people tend to get sleepy. So I usually like to keep my rooms on the cool side, and so I'll usually keep them between 68 and 70 degrees at the very most. Yes, you'll have a few people who complain that that is cold. However, they will be awake and they will participate in the brainstorming. So I really do try to keep it on the cool side. Step 3, pick your exercise. Now, I'm going to give you 2 that work well. But there are many, and there are literally hundreds of wonderful books on brainstorming that are full of exercises, and many of them can easily and obviously be modified for survey planning purposes. So if this topic of brainstorming really gets you thinking and you want more exercises, there are no shortage of options out there. So I'm going to show you 2 examples, and I want you, as I'm showing you through these examples, I want you to think about the project teams that you work with, the clients that you work with, or your colleagues, and think if either of these exercises would be more likely to ignite those people, like really get them excited. And I also want you to be comfortable facilitating, because what I find is that a lot of us in market research, we never were trained to facilitate meetings, even though we run a lot of meetings. So I want you to have an exercise that you can use that's going to be comfortable for you. All right. So let's go and get started with exercise number 1. This is called chart storming. Chart storming is an exercise that I've personally been using, oh gosh, it's got to be a good 20 years now. And it's sort of evolved over time. And this is where we start with the end in mind. So great thinking often starts with the end in mind. And what you're going to get from this particular version is a list of items sorted based on importance and actionability. And the winners, that is, the things that we brainstorm that have been prioritized, absolutely should be used to craft questions or answer options or possibly scales. I find that this exercise works very well with groups up to 20 people. So imagine you're running a kickoff meeting and you're coming to the brainstorming section. What I would like to do, unless it's a very small group of, say, 3 to 5 people, if I've got more than 5 people, I'm going to break them into teams. I usually like 3 or 4 people on a team, and each team is going to follow my instructions as follows. Their goal, we're going to say to them, imagine it's the end of the project, we've come out of data collection, we've written a report, and you only get 5 charts. That's it, 5 charts. What are they? Sketch them out. No points for artistic talent. Now, when you do this, when you give people this instruction, at first, if they've never done something like this before, it could take them a minute or 2 to get started. Don't panic. It can be really hard sometimes, but it's really important to just sort of wait, give them a chance to start sketching, and actually once they start going, they really get into it. They'll start sketching out pie charts and bar graphs and perceptual maps and quadrant analyses that they might like to have. And it's great. And if you are working with a larger group and they're working with a team, that those team members will kind of play off of each other. If you're working with a small group, just have them do it as an individual. So ask each individual to design 5 must-have charts or visual displays on their topic. Once you have all of the raw charts and graphs that have been sketched out, put them on a wall. I wish I could say that Post-its work well, but I actually find that Post-its don't always stick very well to walls very long. So I will often either have paper and tape, or I will, instead of using Post-its, I will have people just put their pieces of paper on a big table and we'll spread it out on a table instead. But paper and tape on the wall is the preferred option so that people can easily see everything. Then it's your job to facilitate. So this is something that you need to get comfortable with. And what you're going to do is you're going to talk through it. You're going to start at the left-hand side of the wall and work your way to the right, where you're going to look for opportunities to reduce based on overlaps and redundancies. Oh, hey, I see that 2 people came up with the idea of having a perceptual map that compares people's perceptions of our brand on aesthetics by their perceptions of our brand based on reliability. Awesome, let's put those together. Oh, I see we've got 4 different charts here that really are all about looking at differences in these in attitude X by gender. Great, let's put those together. So as you go through, you will find redundancies. You will find opportunities to overlap. That's a great thing. That shows that the team members actually are thinking about the same priorities. They've got a lot of the same sort of things that are their hot topics that are going to help them to perceive the project as successful at the end. So you're going to go through and make sure that you've reduced as much as possible and let the group participate. Hey, do you folks agree that these 2 are basically the same? Can we consolidate? They'll tell you. Or, hey, these ones look close, but I actually think they're a little bit different. Can we talk about what this difference is and if it's important, or if we can consolidate these? Facilitate the conversation. Let them participate. Then take the keepers and have them go through the keepers and rate them on a 5-point scale. And again, you're going to facilitate this as a group exercise. So you've got one of your keeper slides. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Let's rate it on a 5-point scale in terms of importance. Okay, we've decided that it's a 4.5 on a 5-point scale. What about actionability? And the funny thing here is that we'll often find a disconnect. That is, there are a lot of people who say, oh, shoot, you're right. It's really important to me, but actually I would never actually make a decision on it, so it's not actionable. Or I didn't realize this. I just always thought this was important, but the truth is I'll never be able to use that data. It's not going to help me to make a business decision. And so that is a really useful exercise where people realize that some of the things that they want are really wish list items and not really important items. This is going to help us because, as you know, when we're doing questionnaire design, people tend to want to throw in the kitchen sink. But as soon as we say, is this item actionable, they will usually acknowledge, in fact, it's not. Once you've gone through, you can calculate the winners and sort them in order from high to low. So I just keep the math simple. I just add it. So if an item was a 4.5 on importance but only a 2 on actionability, it is now a 6.5. So I just keep the math simple, put them in order from high to low, and then I ask my participants, are there any surprises here? And you will get discussion. Again, that discussion is really important. Not only will that help you further with the prioritization, but it's going to help make sure that they're going to have buy-in to that questionnaire design at the end of the day. And then you've got your finalists. You've got the charts that are going to specify variables, which then get turned into questions and answer options for your survey. So that's a great exercise. Again, that's one I've been using for many years, and I find that people really enjoy that process of thinking visually. We all know different people think in different ways, but a lot of people do find that thinking visually helps to get them creative. Let's go to brainstorming exercise number 2. This is called opposites rule. And in this case, we're going to use contrasts to challenge conventional thinking. At the end of the project or at the end of the exercise, you will have a list of items sorted by potential survey value. So here's our steps for the opposites rule. We are going to present some pre-planned hypotheses related to the topic. So maybe if we are doing protein bars, for example, and we've got some hypotheses about what types of customers are most likely to like our protein bars. What are their profiles? What are their attributes? What are their personas, if you like? And so we've got some hypotheses. Then what we do is we have them rewrite them as opposites. So if somebody says, well, one of my hypotheses is that people who are going to like these protein bars are people who are who do a lot of outdoor exercise. This is going to be, this is a product that we really are going to associate with the outdoor exercise market. Meal on the go while you're doing outdoor exercise. And so what we do then is we say, okay, now we're going to flip that. And maybe in that case it would be our target market is somebody who does indoor exercise. And just by flipping their hypothesis, you're kind of tweaking the way they think. Now you're going to ask them, all right, now give me all the ideas. Let's get all the ideas about people who exercise indoors who are going to eat our protein bars. Now, there are a lot of different ways that we can do opposites. Another one could have been maybe I ask, maybe they're trying to do customer satisfaction research and they have all these hypotheses about customer satisfaction. And so a typical exercise might be to say, okay, let's make a profile of people who love us. What are their experiences with us? What do they love about us? So my opposites version would be, let's make a profile of somebody who hates us. They think our company is awful. They think our products are the worst. They think our customer service is just awful, and have them do that. So again, just by framing it in the opposite as way that people are used to, you'll get them to think differently. This is another exercise that I find works really well with teams, but can be done with individuals instead. If you're having it done as a team or with individuals, you're going to give them about 10 minutes to come up with all of their ideas. And then you are going to have the ability to, once they've, worked as their teams or in individuals after 10 minutes, you're going to have each team present their top 5. So here's our top 5 ideas about why people who exercise indoors would love our food bar, our protein bar. And it can get a little competitive. That some teams are going to get really super creative, and they're going to they will get competitive with each other. It becomes almost sort of a fun thing for Team A to be competing against Team B. So they really actually get into it. I find that they get very engaged, and a little friendly competition gets them going. And then basically what we're going to do is, as they present, we're going to have the whole group rate them on potential survey value. So each team presents, and as they present their top 5, the group votes on their potential survey value. I often will use a 5-point scale, just little bit of a creature of habit myself, but obviously you can use different prioritization values. Then we're going to take all of the finalists at the end, and we are going to sort them on consensus. That is, we're going to ask the whole group to go through and say, okay, these were the finalists from the different teams. Now let's put them in one master list and sort them from most to least important. That list, again, just like with the other exercise, now will have a lot of variables we may not have considered. So that is a beautiful thing. Maybe some of them aren't going to get used. That's fine. That's why we have to prioritize. But at least we've generated them. We didn't go into it thinking, you know, every variable is a variable that relates to outdoor exercise. Maybe when we did look at the people who exercise indoors as potential clients, even though we don't think that's our target market, maybe that generated some really cool variables that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So that's what we're looking for. So hypothetical market segmentation study, right? Market segmentation is a big investment for organizations. When we do this kind of research, it tends to be very high visibility, tends to be very high budget. And so let's say that in this case we've got a client who wants to create a market segmentation based on propensity to buy a product. It could be any product. It could be dining chairs. It could be in this case, what I might do is I might say, describe a person who would not buy our product. And what's their employment? What's their age? What magazines do they read? What car do they own? What are their attitudes about this product category? What are their behaviors about this product category? What kind of clothes do they wear? What's their favorite TV show? So rather than focus on who would buy our product, let's talk about who doesn't buy our product. And you may find that you'll come up with even more variables that are more, frankly, not what you may have originally hypothesized. So it gets you out of your comfort zone of thinking about normal things. And frankly, this list is just, is also very limiting. So maybe you come up with, when we think about who would not buy our product, and we start imagining this person, maybe we come up with 10 or 20 other variables that are completely new to us. It doesn't mean that all of them are going to be in the questionnaire, but at least we have identified them. All right, so we're going to do a little exercise where we're going to try it. And what I would say is, because we're in a webinar format, I don't know if I have the ability to see your chats in real time here. It looks like I don't right now. That might be a function of the amount of time that we have together. So what I'm going to say is, if you were going to be doing this exercise that we were just talking about, I could absolutely say, and maybe think as I'm going through it, if I were to say what would make somebody not buy this particular brand of, and I'll stick with the protein bars, what else might a person who really doesn't like protein bars look like? Why would they not buy protein bars, or specifically not buy our type of protein bars? For the sake of example, I might just focus here on people who just don't buy protein bars. And maybe I have some ideas, maybe after some brainstorming I come up with some really creative ideas about what their hobbies are. People have these types of hobbies, they don't consume protein bars. Or maybe after some brainstorming, my team and I come up with an idea that people who don't buy protein bars have specific types of shopping behaviors. They don't buy protein bars, maybe it's because of where they go shopping or how they go shopping. So after some brainstorming, I might find that this short list that I have here actually ends up expanding to 20 different types of variables that we hadn't even thought of before. So I want to make sure that I harness everybody's creativity to generate as many ideas as possible about who doesn't buy protein bars. So let's talk about your experience facilitating. I know that facilitating brainstorming can be uncomfortable if you haven't done it before. One of your things that you're going to have to think about is who's going to be here. Are you primarily going to be brainstorming with internal colleagues, external clients, or a mix of both? What I find is that it's actually more challenging to brainstorm with internal colleagues than external colleagues for a lot of folks. External clients, they're probably paying to have you facilitate, or they know that the facilitation is for, so they are really engaged. Whereas if you're working with a lot of internal people, sometimes that can actually be harder. So no matter what, you need to be prepared. But just as a heads up, if you're going to be facilitating brainstorming with internal colleagues, know that sometimes they can be the hardest ones to manage. This leads us to step 4, which is really just establishing the right environment. When you do have people participating in brainstorming, you want them to know you are participating in brainstorming. You want to make it clear that you are taking time and effort and that this is something that you are expecting to get value from. You don't want it to be too loosey-goosey because then they don't take it seriously. So I welcome them to the exercise. I do something to establish trust. If it's a group that I haven't that hasn't met each other before, I will have everybody go around the table and share something like, share your name and where you went to college, or share your name and what state you were born in. It's just something to look for some common connections, establish some trust with the group before we get started with something creative. I state the topic. What is it that this brainstorming is about? Then I make sure I write down all ideas. It's very important as the facilitator that if I'm prioritizing ideas or if they're putting them up on the wall, that I make sure that all ideas get captured, because somebody whose ideas are getting filtered out, they're going to stop participating. So I remind people, don't filter yourselves either. Variety is key. There are no wrong answers. Your facial and body language, your facial expressions and body language as the facilitator are important. Smile. I've seen this happen so many times where people get so stressed facilitating, they forget to smile. And it seems really silly, but it does have an impact on your participants. And finally, we want to make sure that we add a little bit of fun to it. So I'm going to give you some ideas for fun, but the bottom line is, as the facilitator, you need to facilitate. Don't rush it. Give yourself plenty of time, and don't let any one person dominate, including yourself. I actually was in a brainstorming meeting just recently where the facilitator over-facilitated. While people were sharing ideas, he was kind of filtering them out or pointing out redundancies or pointing out that maybe it wasn't such a great idea, and that just dampened everything. So yes, you're a facilitator, but you also don't want to be somebody who's too dominant. And we want to make sure that we're getting, hearing from everybody. That's a really important part. If you're feeling nervous, just plan ahead. If you're feeling really nervous and you don't feel like, even with writing everything out and having everything prepared, you're still not feeling confident, invite a colleague to co-facilitate with you. Having 2 facilitators is actually a really great thing. Often 2 facilitators can do a really great job, especially if you've got teams, because they can support the teams together. It really does help. You might have to remind people why we're doing the brainstorming, and that's part of your job as the facilitator. It's okay, to sort of remind people, what is it that we're brainstorming about? What's the task at hand? They're going to feel more comfortable that they know where they're going if you kind of give them reminders during the process. But add fun. Brainstorming is a creative process. Some things that work really well during brainstorming is, while the teams are working, give them little stress balls or Rubik's Cubes or other little hand toys. Sometimes facilitators will bring a sound machine so that they can give people like a 5-minute warning toward the end of the brainstorming part. 5 minutes until teams have to share their ideas and have a funny sound. Some people take out the conference table. I've never actually removed it from the room myself. I've also done things where I've had people pass around a foam ball, and that way it adds physical movement. The first time you do this, it's going to feel very awkward, but then you're going to love it. People actually get into passing or tossing a foam ball to each other while they're taking their turns. Another thing, ask them to role play. So I have done exercises where I've said to people, all right, Joe, while you're doing your idea generation, I want you to pretend you're Steve Jobs. Or Mary, I want you to pretend that you're Richard Branson. Or Jane, I want you to pretend that you're a 3-year-old. And get them to put on these personas, and it makes it a really fun way for them to generate ideas with a little bit of safety too, because now it's not just them, it's the persona that they've taken on. At the end of the brainstorming exercise, it's all about assessment. You're going to have to review all of those finalists and make sure that we are capturing variables in these ideas that people are going to be able to easily answer in a questionnaire, that they'll be willing to answer, right? Because we don't want to ask anything that's going to be offensive or intrusive. If we're asking about behaviors, are we going to be able to ask about them with an appropriate time frame? And are we asking about things that are too hypothetical? That could be a good way to prioritize and make sure that the items are suitable for questionnaire inclusion as well. All right, I know that was really fast. I know I went through a lot of content here, but I hope that everybody feels inspired that they can indeed facilitate brainstorming to generate great content for your questionnaires. And at this point, I am happy and eager to answer any and all questions.
Well, great, thank you, Catherine. That was really interesting. I learned some techniques that I'm going to put to use as well, so I thought that was interesting.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I think it's easy to say brainstorming and not really define it right. Like everyone wants to brainstorm, but actually putting steps around it, I think really helps out. So thank you for doing that.
Excellent.
We do have a few questions. Jennifer asks, I think this is going back to one of the brainstorming techniques, is how do you ensure that the end in mind doesn't bias your brainstorming leadership?
Oh, that's a really excellent question. So I guess I would say that there's always a higher level end in mind. So maybe it's just making sure that we're not saying, it's all going to be in that case and how you frame it. So if I'm working on a market segmentation study, at the end that I have in mind is that my client is looking probably for a segmentation model that maybe they've told us that is based on finding segments that vary based on their propensity to be price insensitive. Maybe my client is really, they really want a model where some segments are going to be less price sensitive or more price sensitive. So yeah, that's keeping things with the end in mind, but I think it's framing it without it being too, in that case, I think it's because we're going to likely have some segments that are price sensitive and some that aren't. I don't think that's going to sway us too much. But I appreciate Jennifer's point that, when you tell them what the goal is, it's going to be important to frame it in a way where there is room for brainstorming and you're not keeping it too narrow. It's a great point.
Okay, no, I think that's good. There's another question that, excuse me, came in from Gretchen, and it kind of goes back to, I think, when a client might hire you and you're